Welcome to the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. Here's your host, Morgan Colby and Rick Lemon.
What's going on, Fantasy Champs?
Yo.
My name's Morgan Colby. I got Rick Lemon with me as always. It's Poppin' Rick.
What's up?
I am getting disappointed.
Okay.
So I watched, the NBA Finals last night.
Did you?
Yeah, just the last 5 minutes.
Okay.
I didn't engage in the whole game. I was watching with my wife that documentary Making a Murderer with Stephen Avery. But that's like old news too. I don't know why. It's like a documentary that everyone talked about 3 years ago. I'm talking about it now. But no, I turned on the NBA Finals and then it was over, and I was, happy for the Nuggets. Congratulations, Denver Nuggets. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I turned it off, and I was like, "What the hell am I supposed to do for the next 2 months?"
The Red Sox.
Pain.
Yeah.
What is baseball? Especially when your team sucks. But anyway,
do they suck? They're 33 and 34, so I guess
they're as mediocre as it gets, my dog.
Yeah.
But anyway, so yeah, we're in the dog days. We're in the dark days. The off season, mandatory mini camps are this week for most teams, and I believe that it's going to stretch out into I would say late June. But once those mini camps are over, it is basically vacation time for the NFL players until midway through July, when they can start their training camps. So we are about a month and a half to a month away from training camp, which is exciting. But we have to get through the dark days, the dog days of summer.
Yeah, the dark days.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting. But in that meantime, you got this podcast to listen to. We got to prep for fantasy football, and we got to prep for those 4 months out of the year where you get to freaking contend for a fantasy championship, and most likely have pain in your home leagues.
Yeah. If you're tired of losing, you got to listen to us this summer. We'll help you out.
We'll help you out. So today we're going to talk about sleepers and continue our sleeper series. Next week we do have a mock draft, and then we're going to do sleeper quarterbacks. Our second show this week is, or however it gets organized, is tight end sleepers. So our next show will be tight end sleepers. But we have a lot of stuff to jump into about the wide receiver sleepers that we have. So before we do that, check out our website, fantasygems.com. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, any of those podcast platforms, please leave a review. Share this podcast with your friends. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe, click the bell for notifications, like, and comment down below any questions you may have for us. Also, let us know who your number one wide receiver sleeper is for this year in the comments, and who you've been targeting in drafts. I don't want hate mail here, okay? I mean, I laugh at the comments, to be honest with you, when people write, I can't believe you put this person on the list. Like, you know what I realized about society? You're all fricked up.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah, I am. Rick took on society, the burden of society. Somebody just commented on one of my things just to disagree with me on Twitter, and I was like, "What's the point of, like, you don't comment on any of my stuff, and then you see something you disagree with, you jump in." And you just develop a hot take.
Sometimes it's fun. Sometimes it's fun to do that.
So.
But Twitter is definitely a dark place. I'll give you that.
Place. And YouTube is too. Like, what different? Like, if you disagree, that's fine. It's fine. It's okay to disagree with people. Who is that guy that made those comments back in the day about the third string running back for the Cardinals?
What was it?
Who's the third string running back for the Cardinals? The guy everyone was talking about.
Yeah, that's a difficult question.
It's a deep question. I don't know, but everyone thought he was going to be real good, pass catching back, and Or this guy was like, oh, Cardinals, or this running back, he was getting all off in the comments, and then he sucked. So
It wasn't Chase Edmonds, was it?
no, it was the guy under Chase Edmonds.
Oh, yeah. Who
What
knows?
is his name? I'd have to
Benjamin.
Yes.
Is that too? Oh, okay. I was
That's
gonna say, is that too
Is
recent?
he still around?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway. So yeah, I mean, you can disagree in the comments. I don't care, but leave who your favorite sleeper wide receiver is. We are gonna try to get through this, expeditiously.
You say this every show. Doesn't usually work out.
No, it doesn't. But anyway, all right. Let's start with the first guy, and I'm gonna let Rick take this one because I want him to give the devil's advocate here because he has been cooling on this player a little bit. But it's Kadarius Toney, sleeper number 1 right now. I believe we talked about accuracy wise. I don't really care, but I think he was wide receiver 38.
Yeah, he's somewhere in that range. I think on Underdog he is right now wide receiver 30. Yeah, 38.
And his direct ADP on sleeper is around the range of not one. I started with a 1. Sorry, Tony. In 90. So he's deep in drafts, usually around 8 to 10. So, depending on how your league feels about Kadarius Toney, you can definitely get him later. I personally, I'll get into it in a second. Tell me your thoughts on Kadarius Toney.
Well, he's a guy who on paper should be not only number 1 on this list, but should be by a long shot because he has the ability to be a really good fantasy wide receiver. Mm-hmm. He's playing with Patrick Mahomes, and he has the opportunity to be the wide receiver 1 in that offense, or wide receiver 2 if you count Travis Kelce. Mm-hmm. So everything is there for Kadarius Toney. My biggest question with him, though, is just the health. Because you're going to draft him, and you're going to be really excited about him, and then he's going to get hamstring in week 2, and then he's going to be in and out of your lineup, mostly out for the rest of the year. So I think that is a real possibility. And if that happens, it almost feels like you're wasting the draft pick. But at the same time, the risk to reward factor with him is just, I think the reward does outweigh the risk with his ADP, especially at pick, and this is why he's on this list. Because at pick 90, he's just going to be on your bench. That's a bench. It's going to be like your top bench spot anyway, right?
Yeah.
So if you're taking a guy on your bench, I will take the chance that he can be a elite wide receiver. And I would take that risk every day because if you hit on it, that gives you such a huge advantage, and it's one of those things that could win you. He could be a league winner at pick 90, which you don't really get very often. But you do have to understand the risk with Kadarius Toney. He's probably one of the riskiest guys to draft because of his injuries. But if you do hit on him, you're not hitting. You're swinging for the fences. You're hitting a grand slam if you do hit on him.
Yeah. I think there's with Toney, the reason why he's a sleeper is I think there's a wide range of outcomes that makes him risky. He could get hurt.
Yeah.
That's a very reasonable outcome.
I think the number 1 ability.
That is his number 1 physical attribute that he has shown in the NFL. Get hurt.
Yeah.
But no, he actually, he's shown that he can be a really good receiver. So it's like if he's healthy, he's on the field, there's a good chance that he ends up being a top end, wide receiver in the NFL. Like he could be in fantasy football, he could finish in the top 24. And if that does happen for him, you're talking about a player who finished, who's getting drafted right now at 38, 39, 40, finishing 20 spots higher. If that was something if that were something that would happen in your drafts during the season, that's obviously a massive benefit, which is what makes him a sleeper. I think his chances of completely breaking out and becoming the next Tyreek Hill for the Chiefs are at 4%. And him being a top 12 fantasy wide receiver, kind of low on the percentage chance total,
I will give you 9%. I'll go
Yeah, I
up
was gonna
5%
say
from
nine
you.
or 9 or 10. I mean, like if he turns into Tyreek Hill, that's like a 3 or 4.
Tyreek Hill, maybe
Yeah,
not, but
maybe
like a
not.
top 12 wide
Yeah.
receiver. I
Yes,
think that's
like
a possibility.
9 or 10% is probably on the table, but I think the chances of him, which is why he's so low, getting hurt or busting, are significantly higher than his chances of finishing high. Now, I do think that the reason why he's a sleeper for me is because if he's on the field and he's healthy, I do believe that he's going to outperform his ADP.
He's the best wide receiver on the team.
Yeah, he's the best wide receiver on the team. So, like, there's going to be opportunity for him, even if it's only 120 targets. Like, he will outperform the ADP that he is currently getting drafted at, and it'll be really good. So, that's the reason why I like Kadarius Toney. I did see recently the reception perception chart by Matt Harmon was released for him.
Probably not great.
And no, it's none of his.
But
routes.
he's not a pure wide. He kind of reminds me of what's a good? I mean, he I think has more upside than this guy, but he reminds me of like Tavon Austin, where he's just like a human joystick. You just got to get the ball in his hands, like screens and stuff. He'd be insane.
Yep.
But he's not like a pure route runner. You know, he's not a pure vertical threat guy either. He kind of is like maybe like he's a less physical Debo, right? Debo's not like a elite route runner either, but we saw him have a great fantasy season. I think if the Chiefs used Kadarius Toney like Debo, he'd get hurt. But they could use him in that way, and if he didn't get hurt, he would have a monster fantasy year.
Yeah. So just to give you success rates versus different coverages against man, 58%, which is 16th percentile. Against zone, 73%, which is 17th percentile, and press is 60%, 27th percentile. So that's three. That's just on last year.
Those are all reds, right?
Yeah, those are bad. So
you gotta give me the colors, bro. I don't know how to do math.
His chart is like half green, half red, and there's no yellow.
Well, that seemed worse.
Yeah. Hold on, I'm gonna tag you on just so you can see it because we got to move on to the next guy. But I'll tag you on it.
Now, while you're doing that, let me ask you a question because I've seen some people have this take. If you do think Kadarius Toney's gonna get hurt, would you rather just draft like Sky Moore in like the 13th round or the 12th round, wherever he's going?
I think you could do both. I don't think there's a one or the other situation.
I agree with that. I think you could do both. Because I think if Toney does get hurt, receivers don't have handcuffs, but Sky Moore could kind of be, in a way, a handcuff to Toney. Because if Toney got hurt, Sky Moore is like, you're probably getting like 7-8 targets.
And they also have Rashee Rice, who has the same draft capital as Sky Moore. So, like there's a lot of different outcomes for the Chiefs. But I did, before we move on, I did want to say the 2021 with the Giants profile. Against man,
better?
He was 5th percentile. Against zone, which is worse, obviously. Against zone, he was 63rd percentile, and against press, he was 11th percentile. So he improved in man and press, but zone, he looked worse. And I think it was just the way the Chiefs were utilizing him. And I also think it's the fact that this dude literally cannot stay on the field. So I don't even think we have a large enough sample size to look at a chart like this and say, he
hasn't played a full year in the NFL.
Yeah. So,
or even come close.
There's a lot of storylines with Kadarius Toney. If he was a little bit more consistent and steady, and we have seen more from him, I think I would be more willing to put him on a breakout show. But I'm not there with him because I just don't. I like he's a sleeper to me because I just don't know that he can get to that.
He's somebody too that so last year just with the Chiefs, so 3 games started, 7 games played. He had 59 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. Yeah. I think and this is why I compare him to Debo, even though Debo's much more physical, different play styles. But I think he's a guy that they could use him in end arounds like they used Tyreek Hill and in creative ways to get him the ball. Yeah. I think he's a guy that could push over 100 rushing yards and a couple rushing touchdowns, which would help his fantasy numbers.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Definitely. All right, any more thoughts on Toney?
No, we can move on to the next guy.
Okay, I'll talk about Jordan Addison first because Rick also is kind of he's kind of come back on Jordan Addison a little bit. I still like Jordan Addison, so right now, just to give you some of the information on Jordan Addison, he is ADPing at 83, so he is a couple spots behind Kadarius, in front of Kadarius Toney. And I believe he is the 38th wide receiver, where Tony is the 40th wide receiver off the board, according to Sleeper. So to me, obviously, we don't have an NFL sample size for Jordan Addison. But all the things I've said in the past kind of hold. I feel like this player, out of all the receivers that are coming into the NFL this year, is the one that can have success straight out the box. And the reason why I say that is because I think there's a lot of vacated opportunities for a team in Minnesota who lost Adam Thielen and, doesn't really have another slot receiver. You know what I mean? They could go with, Jordan Olabisi, or I don't even know if he's still with the team, or who's the other guy?
Does KJ Osborne play the slot?
Osborne. I don't know. I have no idea. But neither of those guys, you don't draft Jordan Addison in the slot that you draft Jordan Addison, which is in the first round with pick 23, and then start KJ Osborne or other guys ahead of him. It might happen the first 1 or 2 weeks of the season, but I think there's a real situation where Jordan Addison in 3 wide receiver sets and even 2 wide receiver sets is going to be on the field a majority of the time from week 1 on. So this could be a player that jumps off the page right away. Vikings do have a good draft history with the wide receiver position.
That's very true.
Hitting on Diggs, hitting on Justin Jefferson, hitting, on other guys. So
you could even go further back. I think they drafted Randy Moss, right?
Yeah. Adam Thielen. They've had some good receivers. So Addison coming in and having success year 1 for me is not, outside of the range of possibilities. And I think he's a sleeper because right now you can get him pretty cheap, and I think he'll outperform that wide receiver 38. Is there a chance that he doesn't perform up to that value? Yes, but I don't think he'll finish any worse than wide receiver 40 this year if he's healthy and he stays on the field. I think he'll get the he is probably going to get 100 to 120 targets. I'm not going to project him out for the Adam Thielen workload when he was healthy, but I think there's a good chance that he could have success in the slot on this team and move the ball forward. Now, I'm more interested, Rick, as to what the negatives are from you on Jordan Addison being a sleeper.
Well, it's interesting that you get a rookie wide receiver that has a high-ish floor, which I feel like he does because he's going to have that opportunity. But I just look back at what Thielen did last year. He played a full 17 games, and he was the wide receiver 30. So, I think if Addison comes in and gets that role, probably not week 1, but let's say old. Week 3 or 4. He is old. But Addison's also a rookie. So, it might take him a little bit to get him to the point where he could be really highly successful. It might take him week 6, week 7, week 8, wherever that point is. And I just think, being a sleeper is a guy who we're looking at and we're saying, how is he in this range? He's getting slept on, right? I think Addison, where he's going, isn't too crazy. I do still like him, and I think at his spot, I would still draft him. But I just look at what Thielen did last year, and I see that Jefferson is still there, and I see that T.J. Hawkinson now, to me, I think is kind of the second target as well. So he's the third target to me in that offense, which is still good, and he's going to get that opportunity. I just don't know what his – I don't think he's got a crazy high ceiling year 1 because of that. But again, does he have a high floor? And for a rookie, absolutely. And I think, will he be productive for a rookie? I think absolutely. And for considering where he's getting drafted, would I draft him? Absolutely. So it's not necessarily an indictment on him. I just don't know, if he started to move up boards, I'd kind of be.
Oh yeah. No, if he starts moving up to wide receiver 30, 29, 28, I'm gonna start fading a little bit because I don't want that. But as of right now, if he stays in that wide receiver 40 range, which is where he is now, and I can get him in the 8th, 9th, 10th round as a sleeper, then I'll take that all day. So
yeah.
All right. Any more thoughts on Jordan Addison?
No.
Okay. Third guy, this is Rick's guy, so I'll let Rick take this one. But Elijah Moore, he's I believe in the same vicinity as some. Actually, no, he's a deeper play. He is pick 120, which I think is a really
only once.
a really good selection, so he's deeper in drafts. I don't
Sure.
know the number. I'm not really going to try to figure that out. But he's later in drafts. So if you're in a 12-team draft that's 15 rounds, this guy is going to be right in the middle of rounds 10 and 15, and it definitely attainable. Like you can get him on your team. So Rick, give your thoughts as to why you think Elijah Moore is a good sleeper.
Well, it's funny because I think last year he was probably on our list and we got him wrong, and that was because of me, because I was definitely the one pushing for that. The thing with Moore is like, I think people forget, like, he had a really good rookie year. He got injured, I think, in week 11. But he had a stretch. Remember Brandon Ayuk's rookie year where he had from week, once he figured it out, he had a 5 or 6 week stretch where he was just consistently getting double-digit fantasy points.
Yeah.
Elijah Moore did that his rookie year as well. And then he got hurt and didn't play the rest of the season. So going into year 2, it felt like a big breakout was coming. And he's kind of a diva receiver, as we noticed. And the Jets decided with Garrett Wilson that they were going to use Elijah Moore on the outside, which he's not that type of receiver. And Elijah Moore didn't like that. And he eventually requested a trade, and they benched him. So he basically barely played last year. Mm-hmm. He was healthy, but he wasn't involved at all. So he kind of had a write-off season. Everybody's out on him now. He still requested the trade, ends up getting traded to the Browns. And I think with Cleveland, there's opportunity there. He's going to be the wide receiver 2 right away. Yeah. And I know it's training camp hype videos and all this bull crap that's out right now in June. But the early reports, if you look up Elijah Moore, is that he's dominating early camp, and Deshaun Watson loves him. He's getting targeted a lot in training camp.
Shiny new toys.
There's all these videos of him getting touchdowns and stuff. So the hype is already there. He's clearly, I think, a talented player. AJ Brown said he's the best receiver that he's ever played with, which I think is, take that with a grain of salt. But comments like those, I do tend to value a little bit from his peers. A lot. Have you seen him run routes too? He's filthy. He's one of those shifty guys. Mm-hmm. So I think his ability is there. He just never has been able to put it together. And a lot of people are out on him, and rightfully so. And he could burn me 2 years in a row. And I'm not denying that. But I do think he has the talent. And for where he's going, why not? He's pick 120 right now on Sleeper. That's the Odell range. That's the Adam Thielen range. That's the Alan Lazard range. Why not take a flyer on Elijah Moore, a guy who has that ability and talent and could break out in year number 3? And like I said, the opportunity is there. The Browns, outside of Amari Cooper, don't really have that much unless you believe in Donovan Peoples-Jones having another pretty decent year. But I'll tell you, Elijah Moore is definitely the more talented player. I think it could work out. And at that spot, he's getting drafted so low that I think it's worth the flyer.
Yeah. I looking at some of his reception perception charts, even from last year, obviously not a huge sample size. There's a lot of really good things for Elijah Moore.
But you say he's trash.
I don't like his attitude.
Yeah, no, I get that. But he, Garrett Wilson and him both complained last year. I feel like Garrett Wilson's complaints were less warranted. At least Elijah Moore, they weren't using him right. They kind of buried him. He had at least reasons to complain. I don't think Garrett Wilson really did.
So Jets year 1, 81st percentile against man, 76th percentile against zone, 70th percentile against press, which is very good. And then in 2022, the chart kind of looks similar, with pretty much everything green in terms of the routes, and with the exception of a couple. But he had 74th percentile against man, 37th percentile against zone, 78th percentile against press. So him going to Cleveland, I think the benefit of him going to the Browns is obviously that I think the Browns suck at the wide receiver position outside of Amari Cooper. And I don't think Amari Cooper is all that good either. And he's old.
Fair enough.
So
enough.
to me, I think there's a really good chance for Elijah Moore to ascend into a number 2, number 1 kind of position on that football team. And if he's talented enough, he can, which we know he's shown it before, he can break out and have a really good season with the Cleveland Browns. The question is, does he get the opportunity, or does he let his attitude and his, emotions get in the way of that, which is what happened last year with the Jets. You don't get on the field by complaining, especially when you haven't really proven anything in the NFL to begin with. So if he has a better attitude with Cleveland and he gets on the field and he earns his targets, then I think he should be fine. To me, I think, like Rick said, this in that same vicinity, when you're talking about guys like Odell, Alan Lazard, Adam Thielen, Tyler Boyd, Rondale Moore, even
Jonathan Mingo,
even Darnell Mooney. Like, there's some guys I like in here, Jameson Williams being one of them. But at 123, when you're talking about a 10th or 11th round selection, Elijah Moore is not a bad pick. So I would also be one to go after Elijah Moore. I think he's definitely not a bad selection. But let's move to the next guy, who is George Pickens. And Pickens is a little bit more, I feel like he is, what do we call it? Volatile for the fantasy community, because I feel like there are people who really, really like him.
Yeah. And there's people that really don't.
There are people who are like, no. And they change their minds. So right now he's pick 79. He is 2 spots higher than Addison, so he's going around pick 35 at wide receiver 35 or 36 off the board, so a little bit higher, a little bit more draft investment. But I do think when you're talking about drafting wide receivers that late, there's a good chance that the player is not going to start on your team. But Pickens, all you have to do, I know the mentality with George Pickens is obviously he didn't put up massive numbers last year. He had 85 targets, 52 catches, 801 yards, 4 touchdowns. So, he had some decent numbers, but he had 9 fantasy points per game, which was basically wide receiver 48 in PPR. And so when you look at George Pickens, I think there's a lot of people who look at that and go, okay, well, he really didn't perform that well. The Steelers are now going into their second year with Kenny Pickett, and hopefully he takes a leap forward. But if he doesn't, there's bad things there. They still have Deontay Johnson on the team, so he's going to siphon targets away. So it's going to be hard for a guy like George Pickens to get opportunity. And if you're a stats guy and you just look at that, you're like, Pickens ain't going to be that good. And then you pull up some highlights. You pull up some film from last year, and there are some catches. We're not talking about highlights like Kadarius Toney highlights where he's glitchy and he, makes guys miss and it's fun to watch. No. We're talking about one-handed Odell Beckham catches from this guy. So he's got it. He's got it. When it comes to the X receiver in the NFL. He's a dog. And I really like George Pickens. Kind of pissed the Pats didn't get him. Kind of pissed. But it is what it is.
They passed on him too, didn't they?
They passed on him 1,000%.
That's right.
So anyway, he has some, there's a lot of inconsistencies. And, usually this is what we see from rookie wide receivers is the inconsistencies. His reception perception chart looks decent. I want to say 5 of his routes are all green. 4 of his routes are all red. So it's you're just talking about some inconsistencies here in his route running in his game. 34th percentile against man, 5th percentile against zone, 69th percentile against press. I think you can improve in the man and zone department, but against press being 69th percentile, that shows me that he can get up, catch the ball, and make contested catches and all of that. So I like that from George Pickens. I think there's good things to be said about George Pickens, and I think there's a chance that he could ascend with the Steelers if Kenny Pickett ends up being good, even higher, and be similar to that Kadarius Toney where there's a 5 to 10% chance he ends up a wide receiver 1 this year. I like him outperforming his ADP, though. of 82. I think, he'll definitely outperform that. I think he'll be higher than wide receiver 36 this year, and I think he'll have a really good season. I think a lot of people are just kind of putting him on the back burner right now because he didn't have a great statistical season, and the Steelers didn't look good last year. And all
For a
kinds of stuff.
rookie, I mean, that's not that bad.
No, it's what the numbers are definitely not that bad.
Yeah. And I think he's actually even lower on underdog. He's wide receiver 39. I do think he has valid concerns for everything you said, and not to mention the fact that his quarterback's Kenny Pickett that we don't really know about. And you talked about Elijah Moore being a diva. George Pickens is the definition of a diva wide receiver. There was games last year where he threw his helmet. He had one target in the first half, and he threw his helmet at the bench. And you've seen clips of him in college. He got into 5 fights. He was fighting people last year as a rookie in training camp. He's the definition of if anyone's going to be the new Antonio Brown attitude wise, it's probably George Pickens.
It's always the Steelers, man.
Yeah, of course, because they like that. And that's why he fell in the draft. Because pre-draft, a lot of people had him as a late first round type of player. And he ended up going at the end of the second round. So he fell a full round because of that. So you do have to, take that into consideration. But I don't. The one critique that people have about him that I don't get is the ability, because if you just watched any Steelers games, you've seen what he can do. He clearly has ability, and he is that prototypical X receiver that could be a stud in this league.
Yeah,
and I do think he had a good rookie year. People using that against him too, I don't agree with, because the expectations after Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle, Justin Jefferson, all these guys, that's not what you see out of a rookie typically. Finishing as the wide receiver 40 as a rookie is fine. That's fine. That's not a bad year. He was on pace for, I think, if you take out the first 2 games of the season where he really wasn't the starter and he wasn't involved, he only had 2 catches in those first 2 games. But once he kind of became a starter, he was on pace for a pretty decent year, about 1,000 yards, 60-something catches, so not bad at all. And I think he's a pretty good value at his spot as well. But he's another guy that he could burn out. He's kind of like Tony. I feel a little bit not nearly at the same level as Tony, but he's somebody who could burn out because he could get, in a fight with the coaching staff, could get buried in the depth chart. Kenny Pickett could suck. There's definitely things that could happen where he ends up not having a great year, but he's got the ability to also have a really, really good year. And if Pickett ends up being a good quarterback, I think Pickens is going to have a monster year.
Yeah, don't disagree. All right, let's talk about the last guy, Rashad Bateman. Right now, his ADP on Sleeper is 111. So he is like Elijah Moore in that deeper range in the draft.
Pick 44 44th receiver on underdog.
Yeah, so he is
below Brandon Cooks, Quentin Johnston, and Gabe Davis.
He's definitely a deeper draft selection. He's a guy that you can put on your bench and hold off for. And last year was a little bit of a disappointing case study because year one, I think the reception perception charts that I read from Matt Harmon were pretty good. 74th percentile against man, 85th percentile against zone, 81st percentile against press. So he had a lot of success against most coverages in his rookie season. And last year, I think people were like, okay, this guy's going to come out, break out and have a really good year. He ended up getting hurt, had 28 targets, 15 catches, 285 yards, 2 touchdowns. So there's some good things here with Rashad Bateman. One, I would like to say, I don't think Odell is capable of playing a full season healthy in the NFL anymore, and I could be wrong about that. And if he does, congratulations, Odell. But I would say at this point in the game, it is unlikely to me that that Odell finishes the season completely healthy. So I think that makes Bateman the number one guy on the team for the most part at this point. There is concerns for me when it comes to Jackson Smith and Jigba.
Not Jackson Smith.
Yeah, not sorry.
Zay
Wow.
Flowers.
Why did I say Jackson Smith and Jigba? I was like, I knew I said the name wrong. I knew I said the wrong name. I was like, what am I doing? Zay Flowers being there, but he is a rookie. He'll probably play in the slot, so there's some situations there that you have to deal with. But to me, I think there's definitely upside with Bateman. It's just I worry about the Ravens. Now, I do think he's a sleeper. I do think he'll outperform wide receiver 40. I think there's a lot of good things for him, and I think he can finish as a top 24 to 30 wide receiver. And, if you get him and he breaks out and has a really good season, then that's good for your team. But my concerns with Rashad Bateman are just more related to the friggin' Baltimore Ravens throwing 300 times a season. That's dramatic, but they don't throw a lot. And when you have three guys that are arguably, going to get targeted, Odell Beckham, Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, Mark Andrews, four guys, I don't know how multiple players on that team can have good fantasy seasons. Mark Andrews will have a good fantasy season, but the question is which one of these wide receivers will have a good fantasy season going into this year, and which one will get heavily targeted. And I think there's a good chance that ends up being Bateman because he is, at this point, the longest tenured receiver on the freaking Ravens roster that's a starting wide receiver. And he already has a connection with Lamar. So, and if, we see in training camp that Odell has an injury already, that, of course. But Bateman has the talent. He has the ability. He's just got to come out and show it. And I think at pick 111, that's not a bad area to get him. I would much prefer that over drafting. Wow, I was going to say JSN again. This is just unbelievable. I'd rather have that than have Zay Flowers, who is, right in front of him at pick 109. So I would take Rashad Bateman right now over Zay Flowers. I would take him over Odell Beckham, who is 119. So I think, they're all in the same area. If you had to pick one Ravens wide receiver right now, I would
take Bateman.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I think Bateman is another guy that we had last year who kind of disappointed us, who we had high expectations for. Obviously, he got injured, but even before the injury, he wasn't he was doing okay, but he wasn't doing what we kind of hoped. Mm-hmm. He was on pace before he got injured for just 51 catches, which is low, but 969 yards and 7 touchdowns, which isn't that bad.
Yeah.
So he's on pace to having an okay season before he got hurt, but not anything great. And then you add Odell, you add Zay Flowers, and it's okay, where does he kind of fit in? But I agree with you. I think Odell's probably going to get hurt. I think Zay Flowers, who I like, but is a rookie, might take some time. I think we could see at times Bateman he's going to be one of those flashy guys, and then he might have a bad week, and then he'll put up big numbers and have a bad week. But at pick 112 and as the 44th receiver, absolutely, I am drafting him. Because I do think he's probably the wide receiver one there in Baltimore when it's all said and done in terms of total fantasy points. And one thing about the Ravens offense, everything this offseason has pointed, and again, we don't know until it actually happens, and it could just be just talking, but everything has pointed to the Ravens throwing the ball more this year. Lamar has said he wants to throw the ball 600 times. Again, I don't think that's happening.
Yeah.
But they asked their new offensive coordinator, Munkin, I believe, and they asked him, do you plan on throwing the ball more this year? And he said, quote, absolutely. Running can only take you so far in this league. Mm-hmm. So I like that quote for their passing offense. So I do expect them to throw the ball more this year. It's just how much, right? If they throw the ball more, but it's not that much more, it's not going to help. If they become a high volume passing offense, though, then it will help. But you also have to remember that Mark Andrews is there too, who people forget about. So they do have a lot of weapons, and Bateman also could get injured. So there's a lot of question marks with him. Just like all these guys on this list, there's a reason that they're being drafted as low as they are. But if you're going to take a flyer on those Ravens receivers, Bateman should be the guy you take the flyer on.
Yeah, agreed. All right. Any more thoughts on these guys?
No, that's it.
All right, there you go. Wide receiver sleepers. was a longer show, per usual. We got tight end sleepers on the next show, so be sure to check that out. That definitely will be quicker. Be sure to check that out and enjoy the rest of the content we release this week. Next week, we'll be back at you with a mock draft. See you later, guys.
Ooh. See you.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Champions Podcast. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes and YouTube and follow us on Twitter @TheFFChamps.